Good morning. It's time for chapters 9 and 10 of Vinegar Boy. Chapter 9. Vinegar Boy sat with his knees hunched under his chin, his back against a boulder. Marconius stood with one foot propped on the rock while he fanned himself with the end of his cloak. The first excitement of the crucifixion was over, and the hours of waiting lay ahead. Many of the spectators had gone. The vinegar bottle and the sponge had been hung on the pegs by the door of the old shed. As the hours moved on, slowly and agonizingly for the men on the crosses, the victims would plead for water, and the sponge would be filled with the bitter wine. A reed for the administration of the wine had been prepared as usual from the slender branches of the yew tree. From where he was sitting, Vinegar Boy could see the rolled parchment under the sword belt on Marconius. He knew it was the order for the men to have their legs broken and the bodies removed before the Sabbath. Pontius Pilate was under orders not to aggravate the Jews in regard to their observance of the old Mosaic laws. The Jews would often go along peacefully enough under the bondage of a foreign power as far as their civil duties and liberties were concerned, but their hearts remained passionately loyal to the rituals and sacrifices that had come down to them from the time of their deliverance from Egyptian slavery. Vinegar Boy looked toward the middle cross. The cross and the body seemed black against the bright sky. The title board creaked and swayed in the wind. He would have fixed my face, wouldn't he? He still could, I think, Marconius said. But I couldn't ask him to do something for me, not when he is suffering like that. Marconius dropped his foot and straightened. I could if I wanted it as badly as you do, and if I knew my chances were going fast. I should have gone to the temple yesterday, but the sprouts needed to be planted. We put in more than 200 hills of hops yesterday. There was pride in his voice. That's good, boy. The title board creaked and both looked up. The boy said, Pilate shouldn't have mocked him like that. Jesus never did anything to him. Maybe Pilate believes what he wrote. Marconius took off his helmet and wiped the perspiration from the cheek flaps with his fingers. He didn't want to send the Nazarene to his death. I know, because I was there from midnight on. Pilate is not clever enough to outflank Caiaphas. Why did the high priest hate him? Religion can make slaves of men too, boy, and Jesus came to set them free, I think. He offered peace and freedom. And where is freedom for those who must constantly sacrifice? But why didn't Pilate let him go if he couldn't find anything wrong with him? Marconius lifted an arm and pointed toward the city. South of them, the towers and walls of Jerusalem glistened white in the mid-morning sun, and high over the place of the temple the smoke hovered, signifying the sacrifices of the lambs in commemoration of the great feast. It is not an easy thing to be a ruler of any people, and for this people, it's exceptionally hard. Pilate is scarcely a big man, any way you look at him, but he tried last night, I swear he tried. The Nazarene refused to speak in his own defense. Pilate had to turn on him in exasperation. The centurion's voice changed. Marconius could imitate other voices the way an actor in the theater did, and now his tones were petulant, arrogant, and worried. Why do you not answer me, Nazarene? Do you not know that I have the power to hold you or let you go? I can destroy you or set you free. Marconius paused. I do not think I will ever forget the look that Jesus gave him. Again, his voice changed, and Vinegar Boy could see the scene. Pilate, arrogant and commanding. Jesus, fettered and beaten. But the voice and the words, when they came, did not fit the picture. You say you have the power to release me, but I tell you it is not so. For it was for this that I came into the world. You say that I am a king, and I say unto you that my kingdom is not of this world. But if it were of this world, I could call 10,000 angels with swords in my defense. You have power over me because my Father so wills it. and the fault lies not with you, but with him who delivered me unto you." Vinegar Boy caught his breath. Who did it? Who did deliver Jesus to his enemies? His name was Judas. That's as much as I know. A disciple, I think. But I don't believe that Jesus was speaking of Judas. I believe he was pointing the finger at the high priest through his jealousy had planned for Jesus to die. Why did Jesus say he had come into the world to be arrested? Marconius looked down at him. Again, I do not believe he spoke of the fetters, but of the cross. He came to die. Vinegar Boy searched the face of the Roman. Was he in earnest? How could this be? He knew about death. Everybody died, but it was something nobody wanted. Death was the end of all things. The rotten vegetables, the dead dogs, the funeral processions on the way to the tombs, the death carts rattling at night, hauling the bodies of beggars and lepers to the valley of burning. Was it possible that someone could be born into the world whose life's errand was to die? The boy lifted a puzzled face. His left cheek was moist with perspiration, and the purple mark seemed to pulsate in the sun. Marconius was reading the Latin inscription on the sign. He said thoughtfully, "That declaration may be the wisest and bravest thing Pontius Pilate will ever do." "Then you think he really meant it?" "Yes, I think he really meant it." As Marconius was speaking, an altercation had broken out among the soldiers near the shed, who were casting lots for the bundles of clothing. At the sound of rising anger in the dispute, Marconius clapped his helmet on his head and swung across the clearing. The gravel crunched and squeaked under his boots. His red cloak brushed his ankles. Vinegar Boy followed. Two of the men were arguing about the last cast of the die. The garment in question was the robe Jesus had worn. It was a notably fine woven robe of white wool made in one piece without a seam. The robe was stained, but the fuller's art would restore both whiteness and softness. One guard insisted that the robe could be divided, for such fine wool was valuable even in the piece, but the other claimed he should receive the whole garment. Marconius picked up the robe. The material folded itself across his hand. A strange look crossed his face. The boy had a feeling that Marconius was arguing with himself. When he spoke, the men did not like it. "Leave the Nazarene's clothing alone. If no one claims it, you will share according to your lots. I agree with Claudicus that the robe should not be divided." The soldier named Claudicus grinned. He had a scar across his nose. The other men growled. Those who had worn the sandals, the girdle, and the undergarment threw them back. The bloodstains on the clothing and the sandals made the boy remember Barabbas. Was he still safe? Was he thirsty? Had the insects or even the fever from loss of blood driven him from hiding? "Roll up the clothing, boy," Marconius told him. "Surely some of his friends will ask for it." Vinegar Boy doubted it. Where were his friends? The women under the old tree were the only ones who grieved for him, but even they had not come forward to comfort or caress him. He rolled the clothing into a tight bundle and tied a knot with the sleeves of the undergarment. He stuck the worn sandals under the knot. As he worked, he sensed again a tingling expectancy on the hill. Marconius felt it too, and was suddenly fully alert. There was a movement on the middle cross. Jesus was trying to raise himself upward for a deep breath. The agony of the effort caused drops of water to roll from his forehead. He moaned, and the boy looked toward the sponge and the vinegar bottle. Perhaps Jesus would take some of the drugged wine now, but it was not drink he wanted. He was trying to speak. Even Marconius held his breath. The boy could tell from the way the Roman stood. A hawk-faced man in dirty tunic and leather apron jumped on a boulder and cried aloud, "The rabbi wishes to speak. Silence, all of you." Then he made a sweeping bow. "Speak, O king. Tell us again how you can feed us on bread that will keep our stomachs filled forever. Tell us of the living wells that will flow from our bowels, and we will never thirst again." A titter of giggle ran through the crowd. Marconius swore under his breath, casting a furious glance at the spectators. He stalked toward the laborer, the sound of his boots on the stones offensive in the silence. Then he stopped. The whole hill was silent, an enforced quietness, for no one could speak though they desired to do so. From the silence, the voice of Jesus came. "Father." The word was like an oxen prick, and all eyes turned toward him. "Forgive them." A nervous shudder passed over the crowd like wind over the heavy heads of ripened barley. "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Of all the things the people had expected him to say, this was the most surprising, the most infuriating, the most condemning. The words, like flint, struck fire in the tinder of their hearts, revealing each man for what he was. Some hearts melted in shame. Men and women turned and made their way down the hill. Others moved quickly as if they had just recalled some urgent duty. Still others summoned what dignity they could as they left, but a high spot of color on their cheeks betrayed them. Some stayed. A priest from the temple moved forward. His hand rose over the people as if in blessing. "Do not think that God hears this man. He is a blasphemer. God does not hear sinners. This man is not a son of Abraham. Rather, he is a servant of Satan and is this day getting his just recompense." One of the women by the yew tree sprang into life. She rose to her feet, her voice ringing. "You lie! You lie! You who should lead us into light are leading us into darkness." She ran forward. Her mantle slipped from her head and a hand jerked it away. She grabbed it back and came on. Her hair, uncovered, shone in the sun, a wondrous copper-red coil that fell below her waist. Behind her, another woman rose. "Come back, Magdalene, come back!" But the red-haired woman came on, her face blazing with anger. "You lie! You who boast that you know the Scriptures, have you not searched them for the Messiah? Have you not been told that he would come, raising the dead and restoring the sick? Have you not seen my Lord's miracles?" She turned to the crowd. "Do not listen to him. He will lead you to the slaughter." As she fled past Marconius, his half-raised arm fell to his side. She went down on her knees at the cross, her hair brushing the stones where his blood was drying. "Slay them, Lord! Slay them all!" Then she broke into sobs and buried her face in her hands. "No, Lord, no, I'm ashamed. Should I not know how the demons work? Have mercy upon them, Lord. Have mercy." She grasped the wounded feet and laid her face against the cross. No one tried to touch her. The soldiers waited for the centurion to speak, but he stood silent, his eyes upon the woman. The other women had risen and come to the cross. One was small and silent, the other short and heavy-set, with a rim of silver waves showing from beneath her headdress. She touched the red-haired woman lightly. "Come, Magdalene, come." The one called Magdalene rose like a child and leaned on the shorter woman as she sobbed, "Oh, Salome, Salome." The voice of the older woman murmured lovingly as they passed through the whispering crowd and back to the yew tree. Vinegar Boy had raised his face to Jesus, and he saw the Nazarene's eyes following the red-haired woman, and something crossed his face. Compassion, yes, but something more, an unspoken blessing, a promise of something wonderful in the future for the woman called Magdalene. Vinegar Boy saw the look and read it rightly. Jesus had given Magdalene a gift she had not asked for. He felt a stab of jealousy. He should do as Marconius had urged him, ask for his favor. Surely Jesus would grant it. He must know how important it was for a boy to be the same as other boys, to have a name and a father, instead of belonging to the garrison like the horses and the mules. The bearded outlaw stirred, cursing. Did she not say you could kill them all? Do it, fellow, and save yourself and us. If you are the King of Israel, command that we be let down from the cross. Was it not for such a kingdom we have killed and stolen?" There was a sneer in the words. Jesus did not look at him or answer him. But Dismas, the bright-haired thief, spoke out sharply. "Have you no fear of God? We deserve our punishment. But this man has done nothing amiss." "Nothing?" screamed a fat member of the Sanhedrin from the further line of seats. "Has he not made himself equal with God? He has called us sons of the devil while boasting that he could make sons of Abraham out of the Gentile dogs." Dismas looked down at the well-fed ruler and lifted his nose as if he smelled something vile. "If you are so proud of being a son of Abraham," he called, "why have you not joined us in the hills? This man is more a king than you are an Israelite." A snicker ran through the crowds. The ruler turned purple. Then Dismas struggled to raise himself, and with great effort he twisted so that he might see Jesus. He spoke clearly, but in painful jerks. "Lord," the boy saw pain dampening the edge of his hair, "remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom." The nervous chuckle that had started through the crowd died. Vinegar Boy held his breath. Dismas had asked a favor of the dying Jesus. Would Jesus answer? He waited. The whole hill waited. Then Jesus replied, as though he were speaking from the broad porches of the temple, "Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise." The boy saw the eyes of the outlaw as they met and held those of Jesus, and in his heart the hope began to beat with a strength that shook his knees. Behind him, Marconius gave him a light shove. "Go on," he said. "Ask him. It may be your last chance." Chapter 10. Vinegar Boy took a deep breath as he felt Marconius shoving him forward. Then he started across the stony arena. At the foot of the cross he stood hesitantly, filled with inner trembling. He reached forward and touched the feet of Jesus. Lightly he touched them, so lightly he could scarcely feel their coolness. He touched the heads of the spikes, and the iron was rough and sharp beneath his fingers. Surely Jesus could feel the hope and the faith in his fingertips. Nicholas had said that the Nazarenes seemed to know all things. Surely Jesus could hear the plea his heart was beating. Must he speak aloud? He looked up. The eyes of Jesus opened. Their glances met. Vinegar Boy could feel his heart begin to pound. Jesus had seen, and now he would answer, "Please, please." A woman's cry snatched the eyes of Jesus away, a forlorn, heartbroken cry that came from the dirt path on the hill. Tears of disappointment burned in the boy's throat. But like Jesus, he turned his face toward the woman and the man who were coming. As they drew near, Vinegar Boy knew he had never seen a browner face or bluer eyes than those of the man. The woman was muffled in garments. She was slender, and her ankles turned in the stones. The man was half carrying her. As they passed him, the boy heard the woman's sobs and caught the fragrance of a flower ointment. She collapsed at the cross. Only the hardest of the hearts of the people on the hill remained untouched as they comprehended the depths of this woman's sorrow. "Oh, my son, my son, how can I live without thee? My house is left desolate. Oh, my son, my son." Over the woman's head, Jesus moved and spoke. "Woman, behold thy son." She raised her head, and Jesus nodded toward the brown-faced man. The meaning was clear, but to make it beyond doubt, he said, "Behold thy mother." "No," she cried. "Oh, Emmanuel, my little one, do not send me away. Do not make me leave thee before thou hast returned to him who sent thee. O Emmanuel. The man into whose custody Jesus had given his mother stared upward, grief and indecision on his face. Jesus nodded toward the city. The man pulled the woman to her feet. Come, Mary, he said. Come, mother. Over and over he said it. Over and over she shook her head, twisting as he pulled her away. John, I beseech thee, do not make me leave him. With what shall my world be lightened when the flame of his love is gone? John persisted, gently but firmly. She continued to cry that she would not leave her son, her beloved son, her promised son, her son of blessing. Finally, John held her close against himself and spoke into her ear. Vinegar Boy would not have heard had he not drawn near, impelled by a desire to help, but he did hear. And it was among the things he and Nicholas and Marconius discussed in the weeks that followed the crucifixion. For the man with the leather-brown cheeks and the sea-blue eyes said, Mother, he is no longer yours, no longer ours. He belongs to the world. Would you deny the world a Savior? The woman moaned and crumpled. John lifted her. He was strong but not tall, and her full skirts trailed in the dust. Vinegar Boy gathered them up and held them awkwardly. Marconius came and showed him how to wrap them lightly about her ankles. John thanked them. The centurion nodded toward the shed. A bundle of clothing is here. Would you like to have it? John nodded. Vinegar Boy ran to the old table and picked up the bundle. Claudicus, the soldier with the scarred nose who had been promised the cloak, gave him a surly look and followed a few paces behind. John looked at the bundle and shook his head. I cannot manage it. I will have all I can do to get his mother back to the village. Claudicus gave a pleased grunt and reached for the bundle, but Vinegar Boy stepped back. He thought of Nicholas and the few old clothes in the chest. Nicholas cherished his father's trousers and cap. Surely this woman called Mary would cherish her son's clothing also. Words leaped from him unsummoned. I will go with them, Marconius, and carry the bundle. Something flashed across the Roman's face, a warning, an objection. I don't think you should leave the hill. But they need me. She will want his clothes. I know she will. What about the thing you want? I'll get back in time. You'll see. If there is any justice in the world, you will. But he shook his head as if he knew it would not be so. At the top of the path, the boy looked back. Somehow he had hoped that Jesus might be looking at him as he had looked at Magdalene. But he hung with his head down, his dark hair covering his cheeks, apparently exhausted. Please don't die, the boy whispered. Then he slung the bundle of clothing over his shoulder and began to run. Below him, John was already carrying Mary across the wooden ramp that led to the paved highway. When Mary came out of her faint, she was weak and had to be supported. John walked with his arm about her, trying to match his stride to hers. Vinegar Boy kept close beside her so he could help when she stumbled. John flashed him a grateful look each time, but neither of them spoke. Once Mary collapsed as she had done on the hill, and John laid her on the grass in the shade of a white-columned tomb, with her head on the clothing. The boy sat on the grass beside her and took off his boots. The blisters on his heels had risen and broken. He felt relief from their burning as he held them against the cool grass. John began to talk. His voice was low and expressive, his words a bit ragged, as if his speech was accustomed to being whipped by the winds. He talked with a charm that helped wipe the past hour's ugliness from the boy's mind. He explained that Mary was his aunt. But so different they are. My mother is one of those who are on the hill. Vinegar Boy thought of the three women under the old tree. Which one is she? The heavy, gray-haired one. The small one is called the other Mary, and the red-haired one is Magdalene. Vinegar Boy told John about Magdalene, how she had screamed that Jesus should slay them all, and then how sorry she was as she fell at his feet, begging mercy for them. John nodded. Magdalene is a fiery one. Her temper matches her hair. Jesus freed her from the domination of numerous afflictions, as bad as 7 devils, it is said. Yet even so, she is as quick to storm as is the Sea of Galilee. Let an opposing wind blow, and your mother quieted her. You're like your mother. John raised his startling blue eyes. If so, I praise God. She is a strong and compassionate woman. John loved his mother. Perhaps this was why Jesus had chosen John to care for his mother. Sometimes my mother and I are accused of being soft-hearted. Vinegar Boy smiled. That's what everyone says about Nicholas and me. Nicholas is a steward at the commissary. He raised me. The people are right about you. Why did you choose to come with us? Somebody had to. You couldn't do everything by yourself. But you didn't want to leave the hill. The boy was startled. How did you know? John's eyes crinkled slightly, for even in the midst of sorrow, it was John's nature to smile. You have been anxious about the hill ever since we left, I can tell. All day I've been trying to get to Jesus to ask him for a favor, sir, but each time I'm near him, I cannot speak. The ugly darkness was burning on his cheek. You wished to be rid of your affliction? The boy nodded. Would John think him selfish and unfeeling? If and when it is God's will, boy, he will do it. Have no fear. He knows your need. He knows the need of all men. He sets our bread for us before we are hungry. If he takes the mark away, sir, I will have to pick a name. I have promised Nicholas. And the boy told John all the things that were upon his heart, all the things he had told Barabbas in the dark dampness of the stairway. He told John in the midst of fragrant grass and sunlight. And when he was finished, John nodded with understanding. We all carry afflictions of one sort or another. What name have you chosen? None. I do not know what I am, so I do not know what name my mother would have wanted. It must be the right name for me, sir, a good name, because I will be the son of Nicholas. Names are important, John agreed. Jesus thought so. Would you believe that he called my brother James and I the sons of thunder? But you're not at all like thunder. So it would seem, and I have pondered this. I am not a violent or noisy man. We have a friend who is both impulsive and wavering, and yet Jesus chose to call him the Rock. It's plain to me, therefore, that names are meant not so much what we are now, but for what we will be later on. He knows all things, and I have no doubt that the man of sand shall become rock, and my voice may be raised to warn of a wrath to come as thunder precedes the storm. The boy listened. He did not understand all that John was saying, and he was anxious for them to be on their way, yet he hated to have John stop talking. Mary stirred, and John bent over her. She lay with her eyes closed, and her lids were blue with tiny veins. Her lips were pale, but faint color was beginning to show in her cheeks. John brushed at a bee hovering over a purple clover in the grass beside her and sat down. Yes, names are important, he began again, as though there had been no interruption. Even his name. He turned his eyes upward toward the hill. Did you know that the angels named him Jesus? That means Savior. And the other, the name she called him up there, Emmanuel, that means God with us. Someday I will put yet another name to him. It's here in the back of my mind, the word I wish to call him someday. Mary struggled to sit up, and John sprang to his feet to help. He leaned over. Are you strong enough to stand, Mother? Perhaps you should rest a bit more. Her voice was low. Oh, John, what trouble I have been for thee. If you are trouble, Mother, may all my nets be full of trouble. Vinegar Boy flashed him a look. So John was a fisherman from Galilee. He should have guessed it long before this, for who but the fishermen of Galilee had such brown faces? The boy slipped on his boots. His feet had felt good in the grass, but now the blisters would hurt again. He picked up the bundle. Out on the highway, he turned again to look back at the hill, wondering if he would get back in time. Please don't die. John saw him looking and said, Leave it in God's hands, boy. They did not go into Jerusalem as Vinegar Boy had expected. Before they reached the city, John led Mary down a side road toward a small village where the whitewashed cottages huddled at the foot of a hill like a flock of sheep. Tall palm trees, guarding the flock like shepherds, cast ragged pools of shadows on the narrow street. They passed through a small gate where a tinkling bell announced them into an exquisite garden interlaced with paths of tiny creek-bed pebbles laid in cement. The pebbles shone like jewel dust beneath their feet. Bees hummed about the flowers, and birds sang from the branches of the flowering almond tree. A small grape arbor shaded a red stone bench near a spring where the water ran in a singing stream from the pipes into a miniature pool filled with yellow water lilies. John led Mary to the bench beneath the tender green of the arbor. Vinegar Boy removed her sandals. John disappeared into the house with the bundle of clothing and returned with a mug of milk. He held it for her while she drank. Then he brought a towel, and the boy knelt by the pool and washed the dust from her feet. Her arches were latticed with a tracery of tan where the straps did not protect them from the sun. How pretty she was! Her brown hair had a few streaks of white. Her eyes, heavy with sorrow, were a soft shade of violet blue. She drank the milk slowly as she stared straight ahead where a bed of long-stemmed poppies danced in green and red mosaic against a whitewashed wall. Tears flooded her eyes. Vinegar Boy straightened up. "Please don't cry," he begged. "John," she said softly, almost in reprimand, "why do you call me mother?" "Because Jesus gave you to me to care for as long as I live. Do you not remember what he said?" She shook her head. "It is as if a sword has severed me in half, separating my mind and my heart. I remember nothing but Emmanuel. All the things I've pondered and feared for my son have come to pass. Simeon, you know about Simeon, John." He folded the mantle that had fallen from her head and laid it on her lap. "I remember what you've told us about him, Mother." "The sword would pierce me too. Oh, Emmanuel, my little one, they will pierce thee today, and I shall die." She put her face in her hands and bent her head to her knees. John comforted her with sounds like a drowsy sea. Vinegar Boy patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Oh, John," she moaned, "who will bring me the lilies of the field? Who will press the star flowers into my hands and tell me they match my eyes? Oh, Emmanuel, my son." As Mary raised her head, her hand reached for the boy. Her fingers touched his hair, his cheek. Beneath her touch, he trembled, filled with a longing he had never known. "He was much like you, little one." "Oh, no, I'm ugly, ugly." "He was not pretty, my Emmanuel. Not pretty, but lovely. Is it not so, John? Oh, yes, he was lovely. Always, always he was lovely. I loved all my children, for they were born of love. But Emmanuel was love, God's love. John knows. He can tell you." "Someday, Mother." "He knew he was going to die, didn't he? He knew, and he told us, but we did not want to believe. My hour has come. He